Bom dia, Carlo, tudo bem? Good afternoon, Béatrice. Hope all is well with you. Olá, sejam bem-vindos a mais um IBGC Conecta, onde discutimos tendências de mercado e seus impactos sobre a governança corporativa. Eu sou Guilherme Athia, palestrante, mentor e desenvolvedor da Stakeholder Relations Org. Irei moderar o Conecta de hoje, assim como falarei também um pouco sobre Stakeholder Capitalism e do plano de ações da União Europeia para se tornar neutra em carbono em 2050. Para falarmos sobre o estado da governança na União Europeia e os impactos no Brasil, teremos a companhia de Carlo Pereira, diretor executivo do Pacto Global da ONU no Brasil e presidente do Conselho das Redes Locais da América Latina e do Caribe do Pacto Global. E também a Béatrice Richez-Baum, diretora-geral do ECODAS. Béatrice is a doctor in law. She's the Director General of ECODA, the European Confederation of Directors Associations, which groups 20 national institutes of directors. The principal aim of ECODA is to be engaged in advocacy. Béatrice serves as a board member in non-profit associations, including the Club of Rome EU Chapter. Participe da discussão enviando suas perguntas pelo chat do YouTube ou Facebook. E não deixe de preencher a pesquisa de satisfação disponível no descritivo do evento. Aproveite também para se inscrever no canal do IBGC e ser notificado das próximas transmissões. O Conecta vai ao ar semanalmente. Nós vamos, a partir de agora, apresentar em inglês. Eu vou começar com uma pequena apresentação do Stakeholder Capitalism. Before the pandemic, two topics were rising: the stakeholder capitalism, this substantial movement made by investors and CEOs on growth aligned to environmental and social sustainability, and the EU Green Deal, the European Commission's action plan to make Europe the world's first climate neutral continent by 2050. During the pandemic, they just boosted. Let me start with stakeholder capitalism. But first, who are the stakeholders? Well, simple. It is everyone impacted by a decision. Let me tell you a story of Emily, Mark, and Andrew, the CEO of a $68 billion bank. On Christmas Eve, Mark found himself parked at a gas station with his family in the car under heavy cold weather, but both his fuel and his bank balance on empty. Mark called the bank's toll-free number. That's when he found an angel, Emily, at the call center, who spent an hour on the phone with Mark, trying to get some of his money released so he could at least get home. Feeling bad for a customer stuck on Christmas Eve, Emily offered to drive over from her call center and personally hand $20. Mark said no, but she suggested she could use her break, and she received permission from a supervisor to drive 20 minutes to meet Mark. When the US bank found out the case, it fired her. After all, she broke the rules, putting herself at the bank at unnecessary risks. US Bank said in a statement, the company bars call center workers from meeting customers, so it dismissed both her and the manager who had approved her trip. Emily had previously received numerous commendations and awards from the bank, but they paid her no severance. Nicholas Kristof, the New York Times columnist, graduated from Harvard and Oxford, a two-time Pulitzer Prize winner, discovered Emily's story from an article at the Oregonian. Nicholas tried to obtain Andrew's point of view, He eventually spoke with the bank spokesman, who told him that an internal investigation had concluded that Emily previously had disciplinary issues. Later, those allegations were not proved. A day after Nicholas' article was published, Andrew called him to say, "Nicholas, this is not who we are. We added that companies sometimes make mistakes and that he accepted ownership of what they made wrong. He also phoned Emily and expressed concern for her and her supervisor. I will fix this," Andrew told the journalist. Mark, Emily, and Andrew are stakeholders impacted by a decision, a managerial decision, not inclusive. They excluded Mark and Emily's solution. The irony is that the US Bank's vision statement boasts to affirm that our employees are empowered to do the right thing. Today, investors, employees, customers, people, and communities talk on social media, getting to a common opinion, expecting the company to be co-responsible. And they will penalize or reward that. So companies need to update their culture and governance. And what happened since the COVID-19? On May 25th, George Floyd, a 46-year-old Black man, was killed in Minneapolis while being arrested for allegedly using a counterfeit bill. During the arrest, Derek Chauvin, a white policy officer, knelt on Floyd's neck for about 9.5 minutes after he was already handcuffed and lying face down. The following day, after videos made by witnesses and security cameras became public, it triggered worldwide protests of police brutality and racism, and the structured racism in businesses. As a consequence, thousands of companies around the world reacted, some with actions. Satya Nadella, CEO of Microsoft, announced some actions. I highlight 4. First, doubling the number of Black and African American people managers and senior leaders in the United States by 2025. Second, requiring live training sessions for VPs. Third, make the company accountable for progress on representation. Lastly, rewarding and promoting VPs and GMs based on their impact on diversity and inclusion. But other companies just decided to do business as usual. And a few of them decided on continuing bad practices. That is the case of Carrefour Brasil, where a Black man died after being beaten by supermarket security guards in Porto Alegre on November 19th, the eve of Brazil's Black Consciousness Day, sparking outrage across Brazil after videos of the incident circulated on social media. Dozens of protesters entered a Carrefour in Brazil's capital, Brasilia, on Friday morning, chanting Black Lives Matter. One held a sign reading, "Don't shop at Carrefour, you could die." Inside another Carrefour in Rio de Janeiro, protesters shouted, "Carrefour killer," as a Black man lay still atop the conveyor belt on a checkout. They forced the store's closure. That was not the first serious case of brutality inside Carrefour's premises in Brazil. But let me focus on decisions. The last one happened recently in August 2020, when the supermarket covered a dead body for 4 hours with beach umbrellas to keep the store open. How come that no regional and national level executives were well informed about the case after 4 hours? Or even worse, was the store manager well-trained, empowered, and encouraged to take in-time decisions like closing the doors. Carrefour Brasil's response to João's death was weak and outdated, but legally proof. They blamed third parties and employees and used paid advertising. They promised to change using standard messages, but didn't call any high-profile columnist like Nicholas to answer questions, interact, and dialogue. Just the old recipe for reducing liability and trying to change the narrative. Just like the disruptive effect that the new technologies have on companies such as big data, artificial intelligence, and the Internet of Things, the relationship between companies and their stakeholders impacts their bottom line and growth. On August 19th, 2019, the Business Roundtable, a 40-year-old entity formed exclusively by CEOs and advisors of major US companies, representing 15 million employees and more than $7 trillion in annual revenues, released its new manifesto. In this manifesto, CEO and board members argue that the modern corporation should not longer exist with the sole purpose of adding value to the shareholders. As it clearly stated back in 1997, but it actually should serve stakeholders, including customers, employees, partners, communities, and yes, the shareholders too. In the 2020 annual meeting of the World Economic Forum, the theme was stakeholders for a cohesive and sustainable world. More than 3,000 global leaders, including 53 heads of state, gathered to deliberate on the paths to the stakeholder capitalism. During the pandemic, the World Economic Forum and the Big Four presented the stakeholder matrix based on 4 pillars: governance, people, planet, and prosperity. The metrics were based on the GRI standards. And I personally expect large companies to announce the adoption of those metrics during the World Economic Forum next year. The question I present to companies is, how are they going to act from now on? I can see 4 options. The first one is to do nothing and hope that this movement is another one of these fads or greenwashing, and thus continue with their policy of doing good but doing well. The second is to wait and see what governments will do, such as the practical effect of the EU Green Deal or the outcome of the new president-elect in the US decisions. The third is to let the competition do it first. And the fourth, which I believe and dedicate myself to, is to continue evolving according to the growth strategy, vision, mission, values, and purpose of each company individually. Coming back now to here, to Europe, where the weather is not like there in Brazil today. It's a little bit cold, 2 degrees, Béatrice, 2, 3, yeah. So gray skies as usual during this moment of the year. So in Europe, in December 2019, the European Commission communicated about the European Union Green Deal. Without disregarding the pact and the law for the development of neutral economies, I highlight 2 measures of the Green Deal for this presentation. The first one asks companies to incorporate sustainability into their corporate governance structure. And the second one states that companies and financial institutions will need to increase their disclosure of climate and environmental data so that investors are fully informed about the sustainability of their investments. To this end, the Commission will review the non-financial reporting directive. And that's the perfect moment to pass the baton to Béatrice.
Thank you, Guy. Good morning to everyone. Bom dia a todos. I will not say anything else in Portuguese. I would like to thank the IBGC for inviting me to this webinar. If you allow me, I would like first to take this opportunity to present in a nutshell what is ECODA. So we are a European confederation, which means that our members are the National Institute of Directors in Europe and not the individual board members as such. So if you can move to the next slide, please. So our main duty is clearly to follow up what is going on at EU level in terms of corporate governance and company law. And as soon as there is a topic of interest for our members institute, we try to position ourselves and advocate our opinion. So we are, in that sense, the European voice of directors. So in fact, you have to understand that the decision-making at the European level in Brussels is quite inclusive. This explains why we have so many representative bodies in Brussels to defend a huge range of interests. So at ECODA, we are also engaged in education, in the sense that we have a two-day program for board members. This program is not really a standalone program, but it complements mainly the national certification programs offered by our member institute with an overview of the different European corporate governance models in Europe. What else can I do about ECODA? Just to let you know that we try also to help our National Institute grow. So this means that we benchmark a lot their business model so that each other can learn from the others. And to support our advocacy role, we have developed a kind of internal think tank, what we call the Corporate Governance Dialogue. And the objective is basically to identify the new trends in corporate governance, to discuss their implication on the daily life of board members. Regarding ESG matters, we have just set up a working group dedicated to this matter. But we are really at the early stage for the time being. But we will keep you in touch whenever we have some concluding remarks to share. But let's turn now to the topic of today, sustainability. So if you don't mind turning to the next slide, please. So, in fact, as you said, Guy, ESG has become mainstream in the EU. So thanks to the Green Deal, sustainability is clearly at the forefront of the policy agenda. Just to give you some context, in 2019, the European Parliament declared a global climate and environmental emergency. The fact that the Green Party at the European Parliament is in a strong position is also a game changer in Europe. And in order for the European Commission to show leadership and to develop a policy to underpin the transition, the European institutions wanted first to create the right market mechanism. So the strategy of the Commission is twofold. First of all, they want to focus on investors, and also they want, of course, to focus on companies. And I will elaborate on those two areas in turn. So let's start with the legislative approach for investors. So the European Commission, no, you stay on the same slide, please. So the European Commission has adopted a top-down approach to integrate sustainability at every step of the financial value chain. And the recent regulatory developments in sustainable finance are really shaking up the market. In fact, the investment fund industry is forced to move from intention to action and to lead by example. So the first building block was the revision of the Shareholders' Rights Directive. I will not go too much into details, but what is important to recall is that institutional investors now have to disclose their voting policy annually. They also need to explain how they engage with individual companies, especially with regards to ESG aspects. Thanks to the Action Plan on Sustainable Finance released in 2018, and in order to make sure that funds actually do what they claim, market participants must elaborate on what sustainability means concretely. So a regulation at EU level now clarifies the institutional investors and asset managers' duties. So what does it mean? Asset managers have to integrate ESG factors into their investment decision and be more transparent towards end clients. This step should not be sufficient without the taxonomy legislation. So what is the taxonomy legislation? In fact, it's all about defining a common language on what is green in order to prevent fragmented markets and to prevent greenwashing. It is also about including the creation of a low carbon benchmark to assess performance. So I have to say that ESG is here to stay at the level of the EU. In fact, the European Commission is already in the process of reviewing its strategy for sustainable finance. So the new objectives are the following. First of all, they want to see how can retail investors and citizens contribute, how pensions and savings can be invested for the benefit of the next generations. They want also to develop EU green bond standards, and they want to make the social element more important. So the Commission is right now assessing how a social taxonomy could work. So all these legislative developments have had already an impact on the market. We are witnessing a complete transformation of the capital market in the EU. So the integration of ESG criteria is becoming more of a strategic priority for asset managers. For many years, we saw responsible investors using their shareholder influence to serve companies which were already sustainable. This is what the industry calls the best-in-class management. But recently, we have seen in Europe activist investors that seek to make more of a difference if the policy of the companies is not sustainable enough. We also see more collaborative engagement throughout shareholders. So investors come together to stand up against issuers with the same engagement strategy. This leads to more results over the companies. Another point I would like to make is that the investors also applied exclusion policies for certain sectors of activity. So they no longer want, for instance, fossil fuels in their portfolios. So now let me move on to looking at the legislation for companies. Thank you. So in order to strengthen the foundation for sustainable investment, the Commission is demanding clear efforts from the issuers, from the company. And I have to say that, as you said also, Guy, pressure on company is extremely high. So it is as if nowadays companies have unlimited liabilities. They not only support the economic development of a nation, but they also have to create a new social order and to care about environment. The time is no longer when companies could consider themselves as pure economic agents. They have to move to mindful corporations. So what are the initiatives from the Commission taken to move in that direction? I could have mentioned here again the Shareholders' Rights Directive, which has also implication for listed companies. So in fact, listed companies have to submit for shareholders' approval their remuneration policy. And this remuneration should include financial and non-financial performance indicators. There is also the non-financial reporting directive. So to make a long story short, in 2014, the Commission issued a first directive. This directive requires large companies to include non-financial statements in their annual reports from 2018 onwards. It gives companies sufficient flexibility to disclose relevant information in the way they consider most useful. But in 2017, the European Commission released already some guidelines to help companies to disclose better. In 2019, the Commission found out that companies were not disclosing information quality. As a result, the Commission announced straight away that they will review the directive to enhance comparability and materiality. So this intention is also to cover a larger scope of companies. And the Commission has now indicated the first quarter of 2021 as the target delivery date for its new directive. So what is our opinion on this upcoming new piece of legislation at ECODA? Well, the less we can say is that the pressure is there. Usually it takes about 3 or 5 years before the full effect of regulation, can be assessed. Here, the Commission didn't leave much time to companies to adapt and to perform according to their requirements. We feel that companies need a minimum of legislative stability in order to be able to define long-term strategy. The intention, as I said, of the Commission is also to force companies to provide better quality information. And here we believe that companies need to remain master of defining what is material information according to their specific activity and sector. There is a tendency nowadays to focus too much on data comparability at the expense of relevance. What we feel is important is to get indicators that reflect the business model of a company. And to our mind, far-reaching standardization in order to privilege comparability across companies would be counterproductive. I will mention the second initiative. So the Commission intends now to develop non-financial reporting standards in order to provide more consistency. In fact, initiatives to create new reporting frameworks have mushroomed from private and public bodies. So people are now speaking about an alphabet soup. And it is high time indeed for the Commission to provide companies with a common framework. I would like here to make a point. The European Commission is certainly doing the right thing by developing those standards, but they should also make sure that they keep control on ESG data. And the problem is that most rating agencies are nowadays from the US. Another point I would like to make is also that it's true that the European Commission is showing leadership. The European Union seeks to be innovative, but we can wonder if the EU will keep the leadership for long. Over global standard setters such as IFRS, or organizing themselves to counterbalance and to speed up the Commission initiatives. So there is a kind of competition with this regard. I will not now turn, but we will stay on the same slide, but I will now turn to the most important topic for us at ECODA. So in fact, as part of the action plan on sustainable finance, the Commission is now considering the G dimension. So the European Commission wants to require corporate boards to develop and to disclose a sustainability strategy, including appropriate due diligence throughout the supply chain and sustainability targets. So what does it mean? In fact, the intention is to request more strategic and targeted actions from companies to price what matters and to move away from business as usual. Until recently, and you mentioned it briefly, corporate law used to define the accountability of directors in a rather limited way. So the duty of board was towards the company and the shareholders in general. I have to say that the member states of the EU have not waited for the European Commission to take actions. So new initiatives have been taken to support a multi-objective duty that would balance the interest of stakeholders with the shareholders' interest. So you have, for instance, in the UK, this section 172, which requires directors to act in a way they consider would be most likely to promote the success of a company for the benefit of its members. You have also in France, I don't know if you have heard about it, a new paragraph and a new law, the Pacto law, saying that the company is run in the corporate interest and should take into consideration a broader state of considerations. So those national initiatives echo the Business Roundtable statement, which raise the concept of corporate social responsibility to a new level. It puts consumers, employees, suppliers, and communities on the same level as shareholders. So despite all these initiatives taken by the member states, France, UK, but also over member states, the European Commission has decided to take action to ensure a common level playing field. Here, we don't know yet how far the Commission will go because it is still in progress. But taking a new initiative at the EU level requires a long process. And in order for the Commission to get evidence to prove that there is a need for action, they commissioned a survey, an external survey, to gather evidence in order to take action. So the objective of this study was to assess the root causes of short-termism in corporate governance, to discuss their relationship with current market practices and identified EU-level solutions. So this survey was released during the summer. And I have to say that it was not well perceived by the business and academic communities, because the study paints a very dark picture of boards that only prioritize shareholders' interest. It is said that they adopt a short-term vision, despite, again, the fact that most corporate governance code recommend promoting long-term value creation. So to sum up, the survey is really blaming companies and boards, and it seems that the Commission does not acknowledge that positive change is happening and that board members are taking a proactive stand. So based on this survey, the European Commission is determined at taking a legislative initiatives. So what I want to do now is really to speak about the risk of this upcoming legislation. What are the pitfalls of this upcoming legislation? Well, first of all, the risk is that the European Commission may force board members to take into consideration all stakeholders' interests. And we should acknowledge that stakeholders' interests are often contradictory. And balanced decision-making cannot be regulated. The problem here is that the risk is really that we discourage investors, and that if the investors would feel that they don't have a say anymore. We should not forget also that in Europe, we are facing a problem with companies getting delisted on a voluntary basis because of stringent requirements. Secondly, the second point I would like to make is that there is also a risk that the Commission would lay down rules on board compositions regarding sustainability. So we should not forget that sustainability could mean different things to different companies. Imposing a straitjacket would certainly deprive shareholders of their ability to select the board members. Thirdly, there is also the risk of making this new legislation a catch-all text that would include policies on fair salary, gender equality, and better integration of employees at board level. So in fact, there is a lot of pressure coming from the European Parliament to push for all this topic. And we have a feeling at ECODA that this very broad interpretation would dilute the ESG element of the legislation. So ECODA has already had the chance to express its concern, and we will repeat them when responding to the ongoing consultation on directors' duties. So the new legislation of the European Commission on directors' duties is expected during the second quarter of 2021. You know that the decision process at the European level is quite long, and we should finally get a legislation, I would say, before the end of 2021. But whatever will happen, I think, and at ECODA, we believe that critical thinking at the boardroom is key. It is key to fight the status quo. And board now have to exercise more proactive oversight. So the directors must act responsibly and make the necessary trade-offs. Not doing anything to promote sustainability is not an option, that's for sure. And the risk is high to put the company in danger if no action is taken. So board members should also be prepared to see their responsibilities more questioned. So I will move to the very last part of my presentation, just to explain to you what we see, and you can go also to the next one, because I have already tackled this. Thank you. So what is happening on the ground? So what is happening on the ground? We see that board members are still in the learning phase because all the legislation is new, and you have seen that there is a lot on the table of board members, and not all board members have understood the nitty-gritty details of all the pieces of legislation. So education is really key. So you might have heard about the new initiative of the World Economic Forum which is the chapter 0. So they want to develop chapter 0 in different countries, and with the objective really to gather board members together, to facilitate interaction among them, and to help them to learn from each other and to define best practices. Chapter 0 was just set up in France last week, and if I am not mistaken, I think the IBGC will be supporting the creation of a chapter 0 next year. What I want to say also is that all my national institute tell me that the pressure on boards is not coming only from the regulators, but the pressure is coming from all fronts, investors, rating agency, and even from NGOs. You might have heard about an NGO taking legal action against the Dutch state for not taking enough action regarding the climate. So my final word would be that board members have really to speed up and not to be lost in the face of the different existing norms and the different legislation. But I will stop there. That's all for now, but I will be happy to follow up with questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Béatrice. Very interesting, a lot of things. Just to remind the audience that I saw in the last 6 years here in Brussels, a huge influence on the European regulation, on local national regulations. That is the case of the data privacy regulation created here in the Commission and adopted in many countries in the world with slightly adaptations. That's the case of Brazil. So talking about Brazil, we have Carlo here with us. Carlo, is now your time. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Gui. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here to talk to IBGC's people. It's a pleasure. And I think Béatrice has said it all, but I try to bring some more inputs from here, from Brazil, and how we are seeing that this kind of pressure is going to direct market here in Brazil. First, I'd like to mention that Gui already brought us, for example, things about the business roundtable. And what is very important to know is that business roundtable is tackling so many different issues. So for example, housing. And as you can imagine, the business roundtable doesn't have so many real estate companies. But what the CEOs that are part of the business roundtable think is that companies must tackle societal issues. And it is very aligned to what Klaus Schwab from the WEF, World Economic Forum, thinks and what he stated in the last Davos manifesto. And as Guy said, we had the first manifesto in 1973, and the stakeholders were already there, but not as they are in the 2021. So now what Klaus Schwab thinks and says is that the company must bring the stakeholders to the decision board. They must listen to the stakeholders about their needs, and when I say stakeholders, I'm not talking about customers, I'm not talking about only customers, only employees, but I'm talking about society at large. It's very important to know. For example, Bob Moritz, the top boss of PwC, their CEO, he said that the purpose of a company is everything between the know-how that companies has and society needs. So we are not talking about here only our operations, our supply chain, but we are talking about to try to tackle societal needs. That means we need to listen to society in general. So for example, one very important thing, it's not European, but of course it is directing the market, the letters from Larry Fink. As you may know, probably most of you have read the letters, and we had 3 letters the last 3 years. And since 2008, it's important to mention, Larry Fink already put his concerns on governance. But the last 3 letters are very much about sustainability. The first one, the title is A Sense of Purpose. The second one is Purpose and Profit. And the last one is a real shift, a fundamental reshape of finance. And it's very important to know the first 2 are very much around purpose of companies. And what Larry Fink says is that the purpose of a company is not anymore that approach that we are used to, the approach of Milton Friedman's, but we have, again, to listen to society. And what he said, the first letter, of course, many people was very angry, so to say. So, for example, the Shareholders Association, but also environmentalists and so on. And why? Because one said, look, the purpose of a company is to care about the return, to care about their shareholders, Milton Friedman's approach. But what he said was, no, look, it's not that anymore. We have to listen to society, and you must help society to tackle societal issues. So environmental issues, social issues as well. And what he said is that if you don't do that, we are out of the game. We are out of the game. It's very clear. And the third letter is around climate change. And it is mainly on climate change. And what he says is, if we want to deliver our fiduciary duties, we must not only tackle, but we must map very well climate change. We must have it in our risk assessment, but very seriously. And then what I want to touch base as well is, first, I think it's important to only a part of this letter. So last year, it is, quote, Larry Fink here. Last year, BlackRock voted against or withheld votes from 4,800 directors, 4,800 directors at 2,700 different companies, where we feel companies and boards are not producing effective sustainability disclosures or implementing frameworks for managing these issues. We will hold board members accountable. End of quote. So it's very clear, as Béatrice said, that also the financial market, and now here in Brazil, we listen everywhere, every time about ESG issues. So it's very clear that the financial markets, which has been working with sustainability for 20, 30 years, but now is the moment they are really deploying sustainability issues. They're really screening negatively companies because of social or environmental issues. And we could see so many examples those last years. And one more thing I want to add. So for example, Maplecroft, which is a leading company for not only sustainability analysis, but I would say for a more broad analysis and on social and environmental issues and how those issues may impact the company. And what they found was that last year alone, they identified 47 countries with big turmoils. And when I say big turmoils, I mean turmoils that are enough to change structurally the country. So we remember, for example, Chile or Lebanon and many other countries. And what they find out was that those turmoils were in place because of inequality. So, and they were forecasting that for 2020, there would be around 70 countries with relevant turmoils. That means 40% of the countries of the whole world. And of course, then we had this pandemic, and now we have a strong thing when it comes to poverty, when it comes to inequality, and so on. So, for example, countries like ours, that we are the 9th largest economy in the world, but we are even better in a ranking about inequality. So, for example, we are in inequality, we rank as 60th, the largest country. So it's very important to realize that we will face, maybe not only in Brazil, but in many countries in Latin America. For example, in Latin America alone, we have like 30 million more people below the extreme poverty line because of the pandemic. So those social issues, inequality, will play a very big, important role. So companies need to understand what is their role in this new situation. So, for example, if we, I'm sure many of you are aware and like very much as I do, the trust barometer, the Edelman research, and what the trust barometer says in Brazil is that 28% of people, society in general, trust the government. Numbers of 2019, but it's the same to 2020, and it's the same the whole world. Those numbers, those figures is about Brazil. And not only this, but 41% trust the media, 56% trust companies, and 77% trust the company where she or he works. And that means that there are a very high expectation that companies help societies to tackle social and environmental issues. So it is very much aligned with what Klaus Schwab says, with what Larry Fink says. Because of course, what they do is to try to listen to society to set those trends. And as Béatrice said, board of directors will be more and more accountable for the problems or the issues that company will face around sustainability issues. That's why I think it's very important to only to remember also when you're talking about CEOs, the same research, they say that people here in Brazil, 80%, 80, believe that CEOs must lead movements around social and environmental issues. So that's about their expectation. And of course, as you know, 84% of a company market cap is around reputation, is around intangible assets. And 70% of this intangible assets value is around reputation. And as you know, as Warren Buffett said, reputation we can destroy in 5 minutes. But I like, maybe part of you know Philippe Joubert. In Philippe Joubert, I like his quote. He said, look, if it was in the past, we can destroy a reputation in 5 minutes. Now we can destroy a reputation in one click. So what I think is we have then this high expectation from people, from society at large. And at the same time, we know that our company's values is based on reputation. So that's why I really believe that companies, that leaders must step up to try to tackle societal issues. And believe me, I think we must leave the negationist phase and face that we are in this hyper-transparency era and hyper-connectivity era. So that means that there is no way to be low profile anymore. No one's company or executive or director is low profile anymore. So what I really believe, if you want to meet our fiduciary duties, we must, as people say, listen to society and try to implement sustainability issues in our companies. So that's why, for example, we're talking a lot about diversity in the boards. And when I say diversity, and here I bring, for example, Sonia Favaretto, what we think is when I'm talking diversity, of course, it's essential to have a gender-based diversity board. And also here in Brazil, it's very important, a racial diversity board as well. But we must have a diversity in backgrounds as well. Boards here in Brazil and all over the world, as you know, is very much those very, very unique style. So, for example, a white male around 60, 50s, something like this, and usually with a finance background. So we must change that. We must at least have sustainability committees in place to help the board of directors to ask the best questions they could have. So it's very important. And only to give some more examples of the challenge we're facing now. So for example, last year, because of the rising in deforestation in the Amazon, a group of European retailers sent a letter to the government. And also it was in August, 1 month later, so a group of European investors led by Nordea, they not only sent the letter, but they also came to Brazil to talk to our VP Mourão and also Rodrigo Maia, our lower chamber president. And this year they came again, but they took action. Last year they said, look, if you don't control the deforestation, the fires, we will block Brazilian products, and also we will withdraw from Brazil. And last year they said it, and this year they are like implementing it. So for example, this year alone, Nordea divest in 3 major Brazilian companies. So I'm talking about billions of dollars here. And also they for example, we are leading the Global Compact. The Global Compact I didn't say, but the Global Compact is like the arm of the UN, the United Nations for the private sector. And we are with many other institutions, World Business Council, the Brazilian chapter, and many other institutions, ABAG, ABIOV, and IBA. We are leading CEOs to talk to the government, the different powers about the Amazon. So we can see that the CEOs are willing to talk about the deforestation and so on. But one story I want to bring, anecdote I want to bring to you is that there was a CEO who produced apples in Brazil. And I found it very interesting and curious that he export his apples to the UK. So as a Brazilian, I found very interesting that we export apples to the UK. And what he said is that he has difficulties now to export his apples because of the Amazon. And of course, as we can imagine, his apples are, I don't know, maybe 6,000-7,000 kilometers away from the Amazon. But it's all, as I said before, around also reputation. And here, not only about companies' reputation, but around the country's reputation. So the expectation is that business people, private sector leaders, they need to use their influence and power also, as I said, to lead those movements, to talk to government, to change the game. Not only about environmental issues, also social issues, and of course, governance. For example, and I'll finish here, we know that in Brazil, we face a huge problem, why not say, around corruption and integrity. So for example, last year, we were ranked in the Transparency International perception of corruption. We ranked in the 103rd place among 108 countries. And also KPMG reports that here in Brazil, our company's maturity around integrity and corruption is around 2.5 out of 5 points. So you know that, and at the same time, we know, for example, we went from 2015, 70 companies had compliance areas, and now more than 93% of companies have compliance areas. But at the same time, we know that the maturity is very low. So, and when we're talking about ESG, when we're talking about investments, we know that, of course, companies, rating companies, assessment companies, and investors, they, of course, look carefully into anti-corruption and compliance rules and structure in companies when you're talking about when it comes to Brazil. And to really finish, we know that we can, of course, have very good structure in areas inside the companies, policies and so on, but we are talking about here a more active approach. So not only look into our process and, as I said, or even our supply chain, but also to promote systematic change. And what I mean is, as Béatrice said, we need to tackle those problems with a group of peers. So, for example, we need to do it through collective actions. So you have many different places where you can find people and companies alike to tackle those problems. So as you say, in the 2030 agenda, which is the UN agenda, we say that it is the to-do list of the humanity. So we need to tackle all the social, environmental, and governance issues, and they have then 17 objectives. And the last one, the 17, is around partnerships and a means of implementation. So there were a huge discussion within the UN if there would be necessary to have the 17 objective, but the conclusion was that it was very important to highlight that the only way to make it work is through partnerships. So that's why what I'm saying is that it's very important, as I said, and that I think I brought so many evidence that we should step up to try to tackle those issues, but the only way at the same time is with partnerships. Thank you, Gui.
Thank you, Carlo. Very good. I don't want to have the, let's say, the responsibility of wrap up. We have more questions, but I would just would like, before going to the question and answers, to say 2 or 3 words about both excellent presentations. If I can try to define, Béatrice's presentation is more concerned about regulation and the impact of regulation on governance, sustainability, social issues, stakeholder capitalism. So that's the reality here in Europe, where we have the European Commission as a strong participant in our lives. You have to remember that we are talking about an organism of 37,000 PhDs and alike, only rewarded when they provide strong regulation. So that's the case here. So in Carlos' presentation, we see a lot of examples of partnership, a lot of examples of private initiatives, CEOs and boards, which is also a complementary effort to change the world. So as we saw many times in our history, in the capitalism history, sometimes companies are ahead of governments. They would like to have self-regulation, or they would like to have flexibility. On other moments, we had the contrary. So governments trying to regulate as much as possible. So that's what's happening right now. And the word for that is co-responsibility. So companies, CEOs and board members, they see that they also have co-responsibility for social and environmental issues more and more. Great. So let's go for the questions. I have one here from Daniela. By the way, she wrote in French, very kind of Daniela to use Béatrice's mother tongue. And she asks about Béatrice's information about the European Commission, where she can have access to the links and presentations. So Béatrice, this is your first question.
Well, what I can do, I can just send to IBGC the link, and I guess you will be liaising with Daniela. I think that's the best option.
Great, Carlo. I have one for you now. It is from Eduardo Gomes, and he states that stakeholder capitalism will thrive if more of us consider all stakeholders in our decisions on how we run our companies, where we work, where we invest, and what we buy. How far are we from this, Carlo?
Eduardo, thank you very much for the question. I think we are very far now. But as you know, in those last years, of course, we will have to change very quickly. I think there's no time to wait. And as you could see, for example, when it comes to ESG here in Brazil, the beginning of 2020, many people hadn't ever heard about ESG. And now we all talk all the time about ESG here in Brazil. So I think we are very far, but we have the tools and we have, unfortunately, the pressure. So for example, to give very quickly 2 examples, the UK, they have the Modern Slavery Act. And what that means? That means that all companies that want to export to the UK, they need to comply with the regulation. So they need to prove that they don't have any kind of slavery in their operations and also their supply chain. And now they're going to approve something like this around deforestation. So companies in Brazil, they will have to prove that they don't deforest themselves, but also in their supply chains. It's not so easy. And that's why I think in those kind of pressures now with Biden's election, those kind of pressure, we know that, for example, Biden will re-engage the US in the Human Rights Council, the Paris Accords, and so many other things. So those pressures that we felt in 2020 on ESG, they will be much higher now from now on. So that's why we need to change very quickly.
Béatrice, do you want to make any comment about what do you see in terms of the future of ESG and stakeholder capitalism from Europe?
Yes, thank you, Guy. Well, from my side, I would say that in Europe we see a lot of initiatives to support a multi-objective duty for board members. So we see it through legislation, company law, but also through corporate governance codes. So all those statements invite board members to balance the interest of stakeholders with shareholders' interest. However, none of them provide a recipe on how board members should perform this balancing act. And I do believe that the concept of corporate purpose could be a way to clarify the scope of directors' fiduciary duties. it goes far beyond the business judgment rules and the presumption of good management decision. And the corporate purpose can, to a certain extent, serve as a place of safety for directors, in the sense that board members would be protected from any compromise between profitability and stakeholders' interests. It can act it can act a bit like an anchor for decision making. This being said, and we have a lot of discussion in France, at least on corporate purpose. This being said, we should not forget that Amazon doesn't have a common story, but it is still a successful company. And according to an international study, the company ranks second among the companies most recommended by their employees. And another point I would like to make is corporate purpose. I do believe in it. I think it's important. However, making a step forward and going further can be dangerous. So affirming loud and clear its values, it's not without danger. And let me take the example of Danone. So Danone is a French company, and the company has become the first French listed companies to embed its purpose within its articles of association. So this is a step consistent with Danone's ambition to become at the end a certified B Corp. So in line with its commitments to create value for all its stakeholders, the CEO of Danone announced this year that he will reduce his fixed remuneration by 30% this year again. However, and that's the news, Danone has just announced the dismissal of 2,000 employees. So the problem is that now Danone is catch up with the reality of the markets. So I believe that looking at the Danone case, I think companies might think twice before defining their purpose in their article of association and being too vocal on their values, because there is a risk behind, a risk of litigation, a risk that each and every decision will be scrutinized and questioned. And we shouldn't forget that the case of Danone brings the question of the type of shareholding back to the heart of the debate. So in fact, why Danone is getting rid of employees, it's because it has a widely dispersed share ownership, and Danone can always be subject to possible takeover. Therefore, the board can't ignore completely the shareholders' request for better growth. But I just wanted to present this case because I think it's a case that we will follow. I think, again, corporate governance and corporate purpose is key, but companies have to reflect how far to go.
Thank you, Béatrice. We are very close to the end, and you somehow responded to a question from Béatrice about, can I add on the stakeholders corporate purpose, or can I add stakeholders on my corporate purpose? You mentioned this example. Marcelo is asking about how topics are being treated with GRI and ESG reports. And I would like a very, very fast, quick answer from you, Béatrice, on GRI and ESG reports, if you may.
Well, my question would be easy. So I know that for the UN Global Compact, we have just received some figures showing that a lot of companies are really fulfilling their duty on that. So there is again a lot of frameworks, and I do think that companies are following different labels. But again, at ECODA, we are looking for one European standard that will simplify everything, and it will simplify also things for investors.
Thank you. I would to ask Carlo, do you think that Brazil is talking a lot about ESG because of our cultural aspect of trying to be modern, trying to be entrepreneur? But do you think that this is a big wave, and at the end of the, let's say, when we arrive at the beach, we will be at the same size, or this will reduce and only the ones that are truly committed with the movement will survive? What do you think? What will be the future? So the same size as it is today, yeah. Or briefly, please.
Yeah, sure. What I believe here in Brazil, in the Global Compact Brazilian Local Network, is that these ESG issues, they can be used as a competitive advantage here in Brazil for Brazilian companies or for companies which works here in Brazil. Because, for example, we have a very strong labor law when you compare to other countries, developing countries, and also many developed countries, why not say. And also, for example, now climate change is in the center of the discussion in here Brazil because of our nature. We have, for example, a very clean energy metrics and also power metrics. So our products, they have a very low carbon content. So, for example, very different from other countries. The main emissions, GHG, greenhouse gas emission source here in Brazil is not transport or energy production, but deforestation. So that's why I think we have a major role to play. And when to answer more directly this question, yeah, we really like those trends. We are like this, and we know that we have like 200-300 companies. They are very advanced when compared to any company in the world. But of course, we are talking about that we have like 7 million CNPJs companies in Brazil. So how we can go from those, I wouldn't say 200, 300, I would say 50 companies. How we can also engage many other companies. And if it is only trends that in the end of the year or 2 years from now we'll have nothing, I don't believe so. I don't believe so. Because it is very much in European regulation. It is also now, again, with Biden there, I think it will accelerate. And also the investors, and we need money from abroad, of course, and it will be a higher and higher pressure on these issues.
Thank you, Carlo. Very, very good. I'm an optimist as well, and I believe that we are doing a very good job in many senses, but somehow we ended up with this confusion about who we are. So I am, very, very sad to conclude this because it was a very nice conversation. And I like a quote inspired by Martin Luther King that says, "Our relationships begin to end the day we stop dialoguing about things that matter." And we addressed many things that matter for everyone in the world, including our planet. So that's why I use climate emergency, as I've learned from a friend of mine. So thank you very much. Thank you for the audience. If you do have more questions, please contact IBGC or myself at stakeholderrelations.org. I just have some final words in Portuguese on behalf of IBGC. But Béatrice, merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. We continue to have a great day here. It's very cold outside.
Don't say it. Don't say it.
Well, I'm not happy to say this. I'm just a fact, a reality. Carlo, enjoy your beautiful Monday in São Paulo. Are you in São Paulo?
Yeah, in São Paulo, it's not so beautiful today.
No, okay. But no. That's an exception.
Not at all.
If you have the moment and opportunity, go to a padaria, because I miss so much padarias here. So thank you very much. And I would like to say that IBGC Conecta, no dia 11/12, às 9 horas, será com o tema Programa de Mentoria para Startups, no encerramento da primeira edição, e com os seguintes convidados: a Carla Leal, diretora de Growth da Way Carbon, mentora da Inovativa e membro da Comissão de Inovação do IBGC, o empreendedor Orlando Seabra, mentor Jurema Guiar, o empreendedor Daniel Antonucci, da CRM Educacional, o mentor é o Luiz Rodegueiro, o empreendedor João Bortoluzzi, da Enjoy.it, o mentor é a Edith Bertoletti, o empreendedor Bruno Okamoto, da EUNERD, e o mentor é o Nelson Azevedo, o empreendedor Marcel Freihoff, desculpa, Marcel, se eu não sei ler seu sobrenome aqui, eu realmente tive dificuldade, da Guiando, e o mentor é o Yves Moyan. Então, com isso, nós estamos ainda com 3 minutos, talvez dê tempo para uma palavra final. Vamos começar Women's First. Final word, we have just 2 minutes. So, Béatrice, if you'd like to say something.
Well, I will just say that the definition of doing white things has changed, and the way boards will address all those issues and adapt themselves will be certainly the main criteria on how they will be judged.
Thank you, Béatrice. Carlo, do you want to conclude?
Thank you,
say some final words?
First, thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be here. And what I would say is that for that companies, all those companies who are not part of the Global Compact, I invite them, because, as I said, what you do there is try to use those comparative advantage to transform into competitive advantage on those issues.
Excellent. Well, I like another quote that says that that organizations grow with and for their stakeholders, right? And also, I would like to bring an example of the B system in Brazil. In Brazil, we have more than 400 companies for over every sector, different sizes. So I think it's a very important suggestion for those who are listening to us now to just check their website, their information. So we're not competing here. We're not competing with terms like ESG and stakeholder capitalism. So we are trying to provide clarity about what's coming from everywhere, so from everyone, from pensionists, from consumers, from governments, from investors, from employees, from the society in general. So we need to do this. So that's my final word. I would like to thank you again. Merci, obrigado. And on behalf of IBGC, au revoir.
Obrigado.
Ciao, ciao.